Welcome everybody. As you are joining, please drop in the chat your name, pronouns, role, and where you're located. And also, why you are joining us tonight, and one thing you hope you will learn from this conversation. Okay, as we start engaging in the conversation, on the next slide, we have our norms to engage respectfully with each other. You can take a look at them. Basically, we are asking that you engage in a respectful way that will take care of the community as a whole. And we will start our conversation with our guest tonight. On the next slide, you could see it is Candice Elo. And I will introduce Candice now. Candice is a first generation Nigerian American writer and dancer from the Midwest by way of Washington, D.C. and Brooklyn, New York. They are a proud alumna of the Rhode Island Writers Colony, and their work has earned fellowships from Lambda Literary, Vona, Kimbilio Fiction, and a residency with iArts, where they debuted their first one-person show in 2018. Candice became a 2020 National Book Award finalist, and in 2021, a Prince Award honoree for their debut novel, Everybody Looking. Their forthcoming novel, Break This House, is out in May in a couple of days. I believe it's on the 24th. Welcome, Candice. We are very happy and feeling very thankful and grateful for you to joining us tonight. And without further ado, we are going to engage in a conversation. And I will
Thanks for having me.
Of course, I will be asking some questions. If you are joining us now, just know that we will have space for a Q&A after I ask Candice some questions. So the first question for you, Candice, is could you tell us about your experience working with students and how it affected your decision to start writing for Wyatt?
Yeah, so I was in the classroom for about 10 years, and I started out as a pre-K teacher actually for the first 2 years. So I was teaching 3- and 4-year-olds, and that was a roller coaster. And shortly after, I relocated to New York City, where I became a teaching artist, specifically with all ages. So I started out in DC that way, DC with like after school programs and like some nonprofit organizations that worked with kids in very like alternative ways. And so when I started out in DC, that was like pre-K through 8th grade. And then when I got to New York, I transitioned to only high school age kids. And in particular, I started out with kids that were court involved. And then I moved into classrooms that were all over New York City, but still with 9th through 12th grade. And I made the decision to mainly be a teaching artist because I wanted to work with kids in a very non-traditional way. Like the most, I guess, the best example of how I worked was the last 3 years that I was in the classroom. I was working at a high school in the Bronx called Bronx Academy of Letters. They hired me to be a writer in residence, and basically my class was responsible for creating the content for the school magazine. And I could have I could have skated. I could have really just had like a very after school vibe type of class where we just had fun stuff in the magazine, but I am not that kind of person. And I saw it as an opportunity to get kids to talk about what they actually wanted to talk about and what they really wanted to tell stories about. And so in that residency, I had 3 types of issues, magazine issues. So the first issue was like all inclusive reporting any current event that you want to sound off on. The second issue was the anonymous issue, where I graded the kids in a very specific way, but it was very like strict in the way that I managed all of their information and their essays and their stories, because I would be the only person who would know who wrote any of the essays. And the idea was for them to tell a story of a defining moment that changed or shifted their perspective on the world. And it had to be a story they never told anybody else before. And during that time, kids started to tell stories about fights that they had gotten into, domestic issues in their home, abortions that they had, um, losing virginity, coming out to their parents. Um, it was all of these things that basically kids had previously not felt safe talking about in a classroom setting. And when I took their names off of it, it just all flowed out. And then our final issue that we did that year was the interview series, where they were allowed to interview anybody in the school of their choosing about whatever they wanted to. And that had a similar effect. It wasn't the same as the anonymous issue, but it was really a wonderful experience to lead a classroom where I was not controlling what the kids asked or what they said to each other, as long as they were respectful toward each other and not antagonistic. It was just really beautiful to see that kids, when given space and given lots of respect, um, they will surprise you and they will tell you everything. So the amalgamation of my teaching experience has been, as a teaching artist, decidedly because I didn't want to work within the confines of the way that school districts mandate a lot of teachers to operate.
Thank you for that. That's such a beautiful story. My next question really goes into your process. And so we're curious to know if you could describe your process for creating safe spaces for students. I know you talk a little bit about uh, the anonymous exercise, but are there any other things that you might have thought about to put this in motion
Mm-hmm.
in your classroom?
So I think over the course of the time that I was an educator, what I learned was that creating an environment of safety came down to relationship building. It came down to me prioritizing getting to know my students on a real level. And that meant that I could not police the way in which they communicated things with me. So a lot of teachers might disagree with this, but I did not censor my kids as long as they were not cursing at each other. If something came out, I didn't penalize them for that. I just had them be mindful about why they were using certain language and if it was necessary to use it to tell their stories. So the number one thing in like this whole experience of getting to know each other and build relationships was I did not police the way that they naturally communicated. I also did not police their body language, which is something that a lot of teachers, I noticed there's like usually a rule in the classroom about how you show that you're paying attention or that you're alert or that you're respectful of the adult in the room. I learned a long time ago that a lot of kids learn in very different ways and they make themselves comfortable in a lot of different ways. There are some kids who can't really hear or listen unless they're doodling. There are some kids who don't feel comfortable making eye contact for long periods of time. There are some kids who they cannot really focus in a way that feels calm for them if they're not up walking around. And so I had to let go of that as well. I didn't police their body language as long as I could get some type of signal that they heard what I said and that they were able to respond to questions I was asking, prompts that I was giving. That was enough for me. Another way that I created, or another way that I view creating a safe space or a safer space for kids is taking the same risks that I ask them to take. So if I'm asking them to tell me about their summer, I'm going to tell them about my summer. If I'm asking them to tell a story about something that was scary for them, I need to tell them a story about something that was scary for me. If I'm asking them to share their pronouns, we're all sharing our pronouns. If I am asking them to talk about home life, I am not assuming that home life is dad and mom, or that home life even includes two parents, or that home life includes parents at all. So there's just a lot of like not assuming, a lot of not policing, not censoring, and then just giving them a lot of like low stakes opportunities to engage, to build trust in me before I start asking them the larger, riskier things. So it sounds silly, but walking in the room and asking things first, like, do you eat breakfast? Okay. When you eat breakfast, what do you normally eat? Cool. Okay. Yeah, I don't like sweet breakfast either. I like savory type of things. Yeah. Things like that. And you start there and it's just like you find the things that the kids want to talk about first. Like, there are some kids that they want to talk about food all day. Then there are kids who want to talk about music all day. Sometimes they want to talk about what happened on Snapchat all day, and giving a little bit of space for what they want to do, or a lot of space for what they want to do and what they want to talk about first, is a bridge to kind of like peeling back those layers. Like, first, let me see how you deal with the little things that I tell you. And that goes a long way. So an aside, I recently wrote an essay for teachers and writers about this very subject. And the main steps were me taking their safety seriously in a very transparent way. And so for example, during this time of this anonymous issue, I did not allow anybody to burst into our classroom without knocking and asking permission to speak with someone in the room. That included teachers. So teachers, kids, anybody that walked in the room got treated the same way. I did not disclose any of their names like I promised. And I don't know. I did what I said I was going to do. It seems very simple, but it comes down to that. Like, the way that you build trust with people in your regular life is the same way that you need to go about building trust with children. They deserve the same time, respect, gentleness, softness. And that is the beginning of someone feeling comfortable enough to trust you with the bigger things.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think a highlight of the things that you just mentioned was, for example, like the not wanting to make eye contact for too long. I know that can be like a cultural thing, and in some cultures, people making eye contact, especially for like younger adults or kids, is seen as disrespectful. And I think that sometimes it can be people can struggle with that in the US, not necessarily recognizing the difference in cultures.
Mhm.
And that also connects to my next question, which is, how do you think uh, books that don't center, or let me rephrase that. How do you think books that center non-dominant narratives are and identities, like Everybody Looking and Break This House, impact students in the classroom?
I mean, on a very basic level, on a very, very basic level, I found kids are way more willing to engage when they can relate with what you're talking about. I was a very disconnected student in high school because all of the books that were given to us to read, study, called classic, were filled with or written by old white men. And a lot of times the stories were taking place in the suburbs, and the parents in the books were a mom and a dad, and they were together. And there were, like, scenes in the books where everybody always sat down around a table to eat dinner, and all of these like norms that were not normal for me. And so I think that it's a big deal when kids uh, can experience literature that has an array of dynamics, an array of family structures, an array of friendship dynamics, an array of types of relationships and romantic connections, an array of environments. So like city, rural area, suburbs, all of the above. Um, an array of abilities, like kids who are maybe nonverbal in the story, or kids like different kinds of body types, just all of the things. I think it makes a big difference because we don't have all one type of kid in our class, and so you need a variety of types of stories as well, so that way from jump, when they're in school, they realize, like, hey, literature or stories should be reflecting what I'm seeing out in life. It shouldn't be a surprise for me to see varying types of people out in the world, because I've also read about varying types of people. So I think it's a wonderful thing, like, to have uh, these, like you said, non-dominant types of stories in the classroom, because it just gives kids an opportunity to be met where they are. Specifically, speaking about like novels and verse, I had plenty of kids who say they don't like to read, and then they see that there's less words in the book and they're less intimidated, and then suddenly they feel like, oh, it's easy, I could read this in 5 minutes, whatever. And then a day later, they're like halfway through the book. I don't know how that happened. Like, it makes a big difference. And I don't remember seeing any books in high school with a Black girl on the cover until we were reading The Skin I'm In, which is literally about a Black girl who hates her skin color. So I think I think it's really important, because all of our kids really deserve to see characters that are like them, and characters that are like them experiencing joy or magic or some otherworldly thing that you think that Black and brown kids don't normally experience. It's just, I could go on about this. It's just super important, largely because we learn a lot about the world through stories, and if our stories don't look like the world, that can be very discouraging in how you interact with the world, and whether or not you feel like you fit or belong.
Yeah, that's such a very important point that we also explore at Students Achievement Partners, just this idea of having diverse texts, but also being mindful of how you're teaching those texts, and checking checking in on like implicit biases and things like that. So thank you for that. Speaking of verse, can you tell us a little bit about Everybody Looking, which I love, 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 love.
Sure. That's just a beautiful book right here. I read it and I thought it was amazing. I heard about the writer and I thought they were amazing too. Okay. So Everybody Looking is a YA novel in verse that follows a first generation Nigerian American girl as she's graduating from high school and going off to college for her first year at an HBCU. And she's leaving a pretty strict religious home and moving into this environment kind of that's just full of the unknown. And she leaves home thinking that she is just going to have this big positive impact on everybody she comes in contact with, and that, you know, it's just going to be, you know, this just kind of like picturesque kind of experience. And she immediately comes to the realization that the unknown is full of lots of questions, and questions that she had never gotten to ask herself, or ask her family, or ask those who had been religious leaders in her life. And she begins to just really uncover her identity. And in the course of doing that, she has all of these flashbacks to her childhood, where she starts to kind of put two and two together, that like, hey, this happened when I was 6. This happened when I was 12. This happened when I was 15. Maybe this is why I am the way that I am. Maybe this is why I am drawn to this thing. So it follows her journey from like having one vision of what college is going to be like, and one vision of what her future will be like, and her getting to a point where she realizes she is not who she thought she was. She is way more vast than she thought she was, and that she needs to have some hard conversations with her dad about her future.
Love it.
Thank you.
I would say that it was probably my first time reading a book in verse, so I was very captivated by it, and I read it so fast that I was like, wait, I need more. And well, Break This House, it's coming up what, next week?
Yeah, Tuesday. I can't even believe it. I can't. You want me to talk about that one?
Of course.
Okay. So I hear this book is written by the same author, and they're pretty awesome once again. Break This House is quite different from Everybody Looking, but it has a few similar themes. For one, Break This House is not a novel in verse. It is a prose novel. So it's more closely related to the types of fiction that you may be used to. And it is following a 16-year-old girl named Yamina Okar, who finds out something really alarming about her estranged mother while she's on Facebook one day. And she suddenly has to make the hard decision of going back to her childhood home for a family reunion, during which she is seeking answers to what really happened to her mom. And in the process, when she gets there, she realizes she does not recognize her old neighborhood at all because of gentrification. There are urban development projects all over the city, and everything that she kind of loved about her childhood is pretty much gone. And it becomes an experience of her kind of like making connection between what's happened to her city and what's really happened to her mother. And it's a story about telling young people the truth, and this idea that young people are able to handle the truth if you are upfront about it with them, and don't hide it from them for a long time. It's also a story about grief and loss and addiction, and also having really hard, heavy feelings about people that you love. And so it's a lot more chaotic than Everybody Looking was, but it is a continuation in sorts, in the sense that Ada and Everybody Looking and Yamina and Break This House both have strained relationships with their mothers, and both had to reckon with that and have to do their own personal reconciliation around similarities that they have with their mother.
Thank you. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
And I see that there is like, for the teachers in the room, there are definitely some themes that can be pulled out, like you mentioned, gentrification, you know, that's something to expand on, of course. But yeah, these are my questions. And so now we're gonna move to the Q&A. If anybody in the audience would like to drop questions, either in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly your question. Yeah, the floor is yours. Don't be shy.
While people are thinking about what they want to ask, I can talk about the book tour really quickly. So the book tour is a 3-city in-person book launch in which I will be in LA, New York, and Philly. And the LA launch is on the 24th, the day that the book is out, all over the country. And then I have 2 online events that are on the 25th and on the 1st, with E.B. Zaboy, who is also another wonderful YA author that I love. And then on June 1st with Kwame Mbalia, who is a middle grade author that I love. And then I will be at Brooklyn Museum on June 4th for First Saturdays. I don't know if any of you have been, but First Saturdays is such a Brooklyn staple for the whole family. Like, it is the best time to go to have like a night at the museum. And I will also be at the Black Gotham Experience on June 9th, which takes place in New York. And it will be in like a gallery space that already has wonderful events, but I will be like a special edition of that. And then lastly, or not lastly, I'll be at the Bronx Book Festival June 11th with a whole bunch of other cool YA authors. And then June 18th, I'll be back here in Philly at Making Worlds Bookstore, which will include a panel of healing artists who are based here in Philly to have a more nuanced dialogue about sustainability and housing justice, given that's a big centerfold of, or a cornerstone of Break This House, and also something that we're all dealing with, because clearly gentrification is just popping off everywhere. So we're going to have a discussion about how everyone is navigating sustainability in this climate. So it's a lot of events. I don't know if you guys are on Instagram or on Twitter or anything like that. I'm going to put my Instagram into the chat and my Twitter into the chat. If you use either of those, you can follow me there. That's where I update all the information about these events. If you want to come see me in person to get a book signed, or if you want to do it from home like you're doing right now, staying extra safe, there are options for everyone. And that's my spiel.
Well, I hope you don't mind me. I'm just going to jump right in because
awesome.
I am a fan of another offering that Achieve the Core has made available the last year or so. It's improving reading for older students. And because I'm on their mailing list, I got the invitation to this. And I am also in Philadelphia. I didn't realize that you were.
So yay.
This is really great for me. I mean, I just feel like, you know, you're part of the family almost. I teach at Furnace High School in South Philadelphia.
Okay.
We have we're near 60% student population who are learning English as an additional language. And I teach students who are not like brand new. They've been here usually about a year or two. So they're still really, oh, they're so self-conscious, to speak in English and to share. So that's one of the reasons, I was saying I'm looking for ways to connect more meaningfully with them. Most of them are Spanish speakers, but there's Vietnamese, Chinese. Have you had any experience with this, and how did you sort of bridge that? Because I am English only.
Mhm.
I work with them solely in English.
Mhm.
I know it's not an academic thing; it's a trust thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm listening carefully to the way that you said you kind of start. It's so funny today. This Pakistani girl came back from lunch. I said, "Well, what did you have for lunch?" The pizza. She looks like she doesn't eat anything, but she really enjoyed the pizza. And I said, Aisha, you can make pizza at home with the flatbread, the Arabic bread, and put tomato sauce. And this brand new Afghani boy was sitting right next to me, and he looked at me and he just smiled. He said, "We do that." And I thought, like, just what you just made me realize, like, even that small connection, we make pizza at home with whatever we have. This is what we do, right?
Absolutely.
I never thought it was sort of like that relationship building, but now you're making me think about these solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that for one, you've already kind of started with this, is asking them like more prompted questions about their home life. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like poking around to see what it is that they enthusiastically want to talk about. That way they have an opportunity to exercise using different words. I know that when it came to writing exercises, I've had many ELA students, and I'm thinking about two of them right now who are my students the last time I was teaching, who I loved so much, who they came off like they had an attitude, but it was really a defense mechanism. They were just like, I'm stressed out, and every time I open up my mouth, I sound different than everybody else in here. And one of the things that was helpful for one of them is I allowed her to write in Spanish, and then I collaborated with a Spanish speaking teacher to translate it together. So that way she had an opportunity to practice while she was writing, but she was able to write the first draft in a language that felt comfortable for her. So starting out with the comfortable and then shifting into what is still being learned and challenging, and also grading them differently, because the grammar translation is different. It's just,
and just, yeah, I definitely don't go too big on the quantifying. It's more, I am lucky enough to be able to meet with them and work more individually. And really, they're still new enough, and it was tragic. I mean, COVID and the shutdown was tragic for everybody, but most of my students this year came in September. They started school here in September of 2019, newcomers. Everything's swell. Then comes March. They basically only been in school for about 6 months. They had to go home, and then that isolation, and then they only came back this year. So this group is unique. They've been here for a couple of years, but it's just been,
I get it. I totally get it. I totally get it. And I think that I mean, whenever I talk to educators at all, I just think that leaning into the like, what do we all have in common kind of prompts and things like that is really helpful. And just also giving, I feel like literacy in writing gives all of us an opportunity to like enjoy the minutia of life. Like, stories help you just like have these moments where you're like, I'm not the only one who does that, or we do that differently in our house, but we also have this tradition that is similar to. And so I think that also something that might be helpful for those who work with ELA students is leaning toward giving them novels in verse, because one, the amount of words that is in the book is basically cut in half. And then two, novels in verse, because they are poetry, they focus on word choice more than the average kind of storytelling. And so every word on the page is important. And that way, it is not necessarily about making complete sentences. It's more so about understanding meaning, right? So you can focus on vocabulary a little bit more. And also there is just more space on the page for the student to like figure it out and not be overwhelmed, because I think for the average kid, reading a novel is overwhelming. And then you give it to a kid whose first language is not English, and it's a whole nother thing.
And teachers from, you know, all the English classes are bemoaning the fact that, and even on Facebook pages that I follow of university professors, students are not reading independently for pleasure. They're not. At this point, I don't know, but I agree with that. It has to be, it can't be overwhelming, and we do try to do that to break it down. I don't want to monopolize this, but I have to ask you, have you heard of the recent book that Temple put out called Black Lives Always Mattered?
No.
One moment. I'm attending a professional development series now where I'm going to get 33 copies of this for my students, and it's about little biographies of different people who are connected to Philly, but it starts out with like a narrative, a biography, and then goes into graphic novel. So that's
love that.
Yeah, I wish we get a copy of it. Anyways, what a nice surprise to meet you tonight, and thank you to Kadiatu Koulibaly. Are you also in Philadelphia?
No, I'm actually in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, because you caused me to your last name caused me to look up in the staff directory. I have a colleague at a different high school, Mr. Koulibaly, and I see he's still there. So, ladies, thank you so much. Again, I'm going to just be quiet now.
Thank you for your questions. I appreciate it.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. If somebody else would like to ask, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat.
Okay, let me see. I'm going to read it out loud. Candace, when you mentioned giving students opportunities to read an array of stories, especially reading stories where someone who is like them experiences joy and magic, I went, yes. Any suggestions for stories you think are awesome? Yes, I have many. Do you see all these books? So many of them are YA. It's crazy. Well, I really, really, really love The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. It is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful queer Black love story, YA novel, but it's specifically so joyous and magical because there literally is magical realism in the book where you don't know if something that is written is real or not. Or really happened or not, or if it's just like, it's just so interesting. And it also takes place in America as well as Trinidad. So there's a lot of the text in dialect, in Trini dialect. And there also is really cool like concert scenes. Like there's a scene in the story where one of the main characters goes to a concert with their parents. And because they have a good relationship with the parents and they're kind of like schooling their parents on who the musician is. And it's just, I love it. I love that story. I also really, really loved, Jason Reynolds has written many books, but my favorite of his is when he wrote Spider-Man for Marvel. One of the best Spider-Man versions that I have read ever. And I'm not even a huge Marvel fan, but like if you have Marvel fan kids in your classroom, it's like a great like mashup of many things. And that's Spider-Man Miles Morales. I also really love Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. It is very fairy tale-esque, but it's like pulling from like I think it's pulling from like old folklore, but in today's time, and it's middle grade level. And that's by Kwame Mbalia. Really great. It's hilarious the whole time. It's like there are animals talking, they're cracking jokes. It's weird, you know, forest scenes. Any kid that is into fantasy would love that book. Absolutely. And a kid that has like a big personality would love that book. I also loved, there's so many. Oh, I am reading, okay. There's middle school ELLs. So I was gonna say, so before I forget, and then I'm gonna answer that question. The last one I was gonna say is White Smoke, which is by Tiffany Jackson. It's actually horror, but it's really great because the protagonist is hilarious and she has real attitude problems, and it's great. I really love a snarky protagonist, and it's great for the kids who, you know, they give you a little bit of attitude. Middle school ELLs, I don't read a lot of middle grade, I have to be honest with you, but I will say that middle grade novels in verse are really great still for ELLs. And so I would highly suggest going with I would highly suggest going with middle grade level novels in verse that you find, because again, accessibility, while still having really great, strong, really great storytelling and vocabulary usage. But I don't have a lot of middle grade, so I'm not always the best person to ask, but I know that, oh, there is another one that I would suggest that might be great for middle grade ELLs. I'm not sure, because it is like high middle grade, but it is My Life as an Ice Cream Sandwich, which is by E.B. Zaboy. And it features a very imaginative little girl, like who be in her own world at all times, just making up these kind of scenarios. It is a really funny book, hilarious book. It's really great for kids who are hyperactive and just need lots of stimulation. I would highly suggest that novel. I'm down to take another question of any kind that you would like to ask, because I think we have a few more minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. It was a pleasure to hear you big up the Brooklyn part, by the way. You know,
Hey.
as well. You know, hey, you know, but I don't even. I have so many rounds of questions for you that we'll be here like the whole time. You know, and just even when you talked about Tristan Strong, this is a great book. I'm a middle school teacher, and I was just listening to you talking about how to foster kids' insecurities about sharing things and just being safe in the classroom environment. So those things touch me. And you know, sometimes you get a wow moment when you was talking about for the L's to write in their own language, because right now we're doing writer's block, and some of the things that I'm asking my NL class, some of the kids are struggling, and I never even thought about I should be the one struggling and making them write in their own language, and then I could decipher of like how am I gonna see what their true artwork is, you know, because they're trying to make it into English, and I'm not really seeing their own voice through their written work. And when you said that, like, you know, so that blew me away, you know. And the protagonist we read this book, The New Kid by Jerry Craft. It's an anime, and it's one of the few animations that had a Black character, and the protagonist was successful. And I think so many literature in middle school, I think that's why a lot of kids don't want to read, because they don't see themselves being successful. Yeah. Unless it's somebody dribbling a basketball or somebody playing football or somebody coming from the hood. Like, just don't see a lot of success stories. You know? But my one question is this. how do you ensure students like even want to share their work? Because a lot of times for middle school, the kids, they want to please each other. So there's that dynamic of like growing up and being in a classroom. I feel like they're so adverse of want to learn in the classroom, and then if they share in front of their classroom mates, they're gonna feel a sort of way. So when you're talking about fostering kids into making them feel so secure in the classroom to share their own voice, I feel that's the biggest problem I have now, even with the writer's block, because the kids,
Yeah.
they're just so scared of each other, what they're gonna say, you know?
I am thinking of something that I did in my second to last year, where we were in the process of drafting stories for the magazine, and none of my kids wanted to share at the time, like at all. Nobody was doing that. And so what I would do is I would keep up with what they were working on, and I would, like, the night before, like, I would take their stuff home, find one exemplary line in everybody's paper and make it into a PowerPoint presentation and just go through them and show them anonymously on the smartboard and allow the entire class to praise the line. And so shifting away from, oh, you got to read, please read this paragraph or share your whole essay, me just giving them personal shout outs without anybody knowing that it's their line, and then giving the kid the opportunity to reveal themselves if they want to take credit for this excellent sentence that they put up. And every kid has one good line, like every kid will have one. And so you can either do something like that where you prepare it ahead of time, and then you're like, you like click through and you're like, I just want to shout out these amazing lines, and you surprise everybody by pulling one from everybody's pieces. Or you can, if you want it to be verbal, you can ask for them to simply share one line that you love that you wrote, instead of asking for anything more than that. Just low stakes, like giving them the chance to reveal themselves.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
I hope that helps.
And seeing some praises in the chat.
Yay. Anything else? If not, I mean, if you have any other questions for me, we could end on one of yours, Kariatu.
I have many questions, but I will work on my wait time and I will give the floor a little bit more time. If there's any last minute questions, just drop them in the chat or unmute and ask away.
If I may, I love the ideas that you had shared at the beginning of this hour with the magazines. You said one was news, that's sort of, you know, objective enough, hopefully. And then a second was anonymous writing. And then thirdly, you said interviews. Now, for that, did you give them any structure at all, or did they tell you in advance who they were going to interview so that you would have like an array? Was it just folks in the class, or was it the wider school? Was it their families? How did that go?
I did give them structure, and I changed the structure depending on the class. Some classes could not handle going beyond our classroom, and you know as the teacher which ones those are. And then there were classes who I said, you can interview anybody in this school. It could be a teacher, it could be the principal, it could be the janitor, it could be someone in this classroom, it could be me, anybody who attends this school or works at this school, you are allowed to interview. And so I went through a process of making sure that they actually did it by having them start with a worksheet, and the worksheet had to be filled in before they could start the project. So the worksheet included who they were going to interview them, why they find this person interesting, what they already know about this person, and what are the follow-up questions that they want to ask that they couldn't Google or ask somebody else. So the idea was like, you're supposed to learn something that you can't find on the internet or you can't find out from one of their friends. And you also have to tell me why you think they're interesting, because journalism is about first your curiosity. And so they had to pretty much go through me first, like prove like this is legitimately a person you want to interview. This is why you want to interview them. And then I also did that to make sure no two kids were interviewing the same person.
Super helpful. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
great.
Do you have any ideas for a math teacher?
I mean, the main thing that I would say to a math teacher is me being a student who sucked at math. I was terrible at math. My strengths lied in the word problems. Some kids really hate word problems, but I was able to do better with those because of the fact that they had a story attached. So maybe consider making up your own stories for the things that are not sticking, and utilizing the names that are in the room. Kids that are not paying attention will suddenly pay attention if they realize their name is in the story.
We have just a few housekeeping informations. The first one, here's the link that I just put in the chat to follow and get all the information on Candice's book tour. If you are able to join in person or online, please click on the link and get all the information. The next thing is that we have the core advocates that you can follow on Eventbrite, so you can keep in touch with us and also know about all the events that that we put together for Achieve the Core. We have a few coming up, so make sure you follow us on Eventbrite. And the next thing is that we have, we love feedback. And so if you could please click on the link that I am just dropping in the chat to give us feedback so we can continue to provide these events. And the last thing is that we also have, you can also sign up to be a part of the Core Advocate groups. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Candice, for coming and dropping all of these great ideas.